It's taking a minute, it's thinking about coming up. Looks like we're live and good sound. All right, so we need to finish talking about corporate culture, and then we'll talk about corporate governance and the impact that corporate governance has on corporate culture. But we left off talking about symbols and meaning and things like that. And so it's important that we recognize that a lot of what we do in terms of establishing or developing a culture is done through the use of symbols. And symbols take on meaning or secondary characteristics in the mind of our employees that are important. So we talked about, as an example, sometimes what we can use is larger culture to look at impacts and influences on individuals. And so obviously we see this in the United States in that we have a culture that is sort of unique and distinct from other nations in the world. And I gave you some examples, I think, last time, talking about, for example, my experience as a foreign exchange student in Germany, where we have this phenomenon in the United States that is called the American dream. And nobody runs around, and I said this last time, I believe, nobody runs around Germany saying, my German dream. That's just not something they say. The way we say my American dream, and my American dream has very specific ideas to it. And I think I asked you what some of those ideas were. And somebody said something like, well, it's owning a house. That is part of the American dream. That's not part of other cultures' dreams. Most places in the world, home ownership is pretty rare. They're used to living in apartments. There are very few places in the United States that's true. If you were born in New York City and you grew up in New York City, you probably will never own a home. But outside of a very few small select locations, that is a huge part of the American dream. And it's a huge symbol of Americanism, is home ownership. And the images that are associated with that, the white picket fence, the two cats in the yard, right? They've written songs about this. What are some other symbols that we have that are really important as far as American culture goes?
I'd say football.
Football, and we talked about this. By football, we mean real football, not fake football, even though our real football doesn't involve actually using your foot except in very limited instances, whereas fake football actually involves playing with your feet. But yeah, the American football, the NFL, the flag, the American eagle are all symbols of American culture that are deeply ingrained in our psyche. And they provide heuristics or information shortcuts that we all appreciate. Companies likewise need to do this. And that's one of the reasons why branding scholars will tell you that a company's brand is the most important decision that the company will make. Now, I disagree with that. So Kevin Lane Keller is one of the branding scholars who makes this argument that brand image is the most important thing. Coming up with a really good brand is the most important decision a company will make. I have a tendency to think that's not true because I've taken a lot of companies through bankruptcy when I was in the private practice of law that had really good brands. They had really good images and they didn't have really great products. But it is certainly important that you have a good brand and that your employees identify with that brand to the extent that we engage in something called living the brand. That's what we want to do. So marketing is not just about, I told you that marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm, and we want to get our employees, so we work both internally and externally to ensure that every part of the firm is engaging in and creating value for our customers and constituents. And one way you do that is by engaging in living the brand. Now, one company that has historically, until very recently, done an exceptional job of getting their employees to live the brand has been Southwest Airlines. What's the symbol of Southwest Airlines? Anybody know?
The tail of the plane.
Well, there's symbols on the tail of the plane, but it's not the tail of the plane. That would be like every airline, uses the tail of the plane. That's where your FAA registration is also located. It's in the United States called an N number. So all planes that are registered in the United States begin with the letter N. That stands for November. We use the phonetic alphabet, and so they have that. And then all Southwest planes have a registration, so they have a number, and then they all end with SW, which stands for Southwest, which in the phonetic alphabet is Sierra Whiskey. That's not their symbol, but it's part of their branding is to put that SW on every plane. And when they call in to control either center, approach, departure, or tower, they use flight numbers rather than that N number. Those of us who don't have regular flights use an N number to talk to control. But what's the symbol of Southwest? You all have computers, you could look it up. Well, it's changed. It's what? It's a heart. Yes, the heart is the symbol of Southwest. Southwest was known as the Love Airline. So they started out being completely intra-state so that they weren't regulated by the federal government in interstate commerce. And they started out by, and you'll see my really bad drawing, but we'll pretend that I can kind of draw. All right, so that's Texas, and over here's Dallas, Austin, and Houston. And they had a triangle. The founder of Southwest drew on the back of a napkin a triangle. And the idea was that they would fly flights because the men in the oil business needed to get between those three cities in Texas quickly and easily. They would be involved wholly in intrastate, and we talked about this before, right? Intrastate commerce versus interstate commerce, right? And they were wholly intrastate, so they weren't regulated the same way the federal government was regulating the other airlines that were involved in interstate commerce as opposed to intrastate commerce. So they started out, it's this heart, it's the Love Airline. And Southwest actually, as part of their culture, they had a court case that I believe may have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. So they have this love as their symbol. They're going to love their customers, and they did for a long time. They love their customers. Southwest has recently maybe stopped loving their customers because they faced a hostile sort of takeover situation by some people that have bought into Southwest and are trying to take it over and change the culture. So what's one of the things that Southwest did to love you? Free checked bags, right. You had every person, their fare was 2 free checked bags. And as a result of other airlines, one of the reasons that I like flying on Southwest as opposed to some of the other airlines is because of that 2 free checked bags policy. It made boarding Southwest Airlines in many instances a lot easier than other airlines. If you're going to charge me to check my bags, $50, right? That increases the ticket fee a huge percentage of what I'm actually paying. And so I may not check my bags, and I'm going to try and get everything I can into these carry-ons. And this is like a huge annoyance to me on people in the other airlines. They will come in with the absolute largest carry-on that they can get. They have bought the cheapest seat, and then they're insistent that they're going to try and shove that carry-on into the overhead baggage. And it takes forever to get people, because they're carrying on their bag because they don't want to pay the $50 in checked fees, and they're running down the aisle. I mean, my goal when I walk on an airline is to have nothing in my hand except my phone. And Southwest allows you to do that, because if you got 2 free checked bags, why would you need to carry? Now, there are people who are like, don't understand modern technology, who it's just like, I'm not checking my bag because they'll lose it. They don't lose bags anymore, by and large, for the most part, because it's all automated. Once we got scanned baggage, it used to be in the older days, yeah, they lost bags because they would have to put these tags on the bag for various airports. And so you'd have like 2 or 3 tags if you had a transfer. If you had more than one layover, you'd have, and the chances of them losing your bag could be significant. Anymore, everything's scanned, it goes through an optical reader as it goes through, and it's automatically routed in many instances to the destination. It's the same with US mail. Why is US mail so much more efficient than it was when I was a kid? When I was a kid, if you wanted to ship something out for Christmas and make sure that it got there and you had family in other states, you sent it in October to make sure that it would arrive by Christmas. That's no longer the case, right? Because it's fairly efficient in terms of the logistics of the programming that sorts and tracks all of those pieces of luggage. So Southwest, one of their things was they love you, and they provided free check bags, 2 per customer, huge deal. They've now decided they're not going to do that anymore. What was another thing that they did that allowed for really efficient boarding, which meant that Southwest was on time? And part of this love culture was we're on time more than other airlines. Why was that?
They not have assigned seats.
They did not have assigned seating. So it was you get on and you get in your chair. If you have assigned seating, now you have to get everybody sort of staggered, right? And if you have assigned seating and you have class systems where you have first class, business class, coach, you have to figure out. So if I'm a first class passenger, first class passengers are usually at the front of the plane. They're always at the front of the plane, which means that they're always the first on the jet bridge. If you want to load an airplane efficiently, you got to get the back of the airplane loaded first. But you have people that are paying more money and they're going to take more time, and they're at the front of the plane, right? So you let them on first. All the airlines do this. They allow first class passengers to board first so that they can get in their seats and get comfortable. But that means that you're loading the front of the plane first, whereas what you should be doing is loading literally. If you wanted to do this efficiently, you would have a system that would line everybody up, and you would start with the back rows, window seat, middle seat, aisle seat, right? So that people would walk down and instantly get into those seats and not block the aisleway. That would be the most efficient way of loading the aircraft. So Southwest had this no assigned seat policy, which was once you got on board, it was open seating, and they would say it over and over and over again, like there are, and they would have people standing there. There are no more aisle seats. You need to just move into the seat as quickly as you can. And they were enormously efficient at boarding. They're doing away with that now. Southwest also, as part of their culture, so they had the symbol, which is a heart, as part of their culture, and it meant a lot. They also insisted at one point in time that they could only hire female flight attendants. Now, back in the day, we didn't call them flight attendants, we called them stewardesses. And their policy was that they would only hire female stewardesses. We've changed the language so that we no longer say stewardess, we say flight attendants, because there are now male flight attendants, right? And there have been for a long time. So we've changed that nomenclature, which is a change in the symbol and meaning of something. And Southwest argued that they only could hire females because it was a bona fide occupational qualification. This was part of their culture, a BFOQ. They said, look, BFOQ, bona fide occupational qualification. They said, we cater primarily from their earliest days to businessmen who are traveling, and they want to feel comfortable, and they feel much more comfortable with female flight attendants. They just feel more loved by female flight attendants. We're the love airline, and our business clients, who are primarily men, are going to feel more love from a female flight attendant. And so it's a bona fide occupational qualification. And this case went to the courts, and the court said, no, it's not a bona fide occupational qualification. Why not? What is the primary reason that we have flight attendants on scheduled air traffic routes? Are they optional or are they mandatory according to the FAA?
Mandatory.
They're mandatory according to the FAA. They are a mandatory personnel that you have to have, and you have to have so many per passenger, per so many passengers. Why do you have to have them? They're not about, what do they spend most of their time doing? They spend most of their time bringing you beverages and snacks. Now, when I first started flying years and years and years ago, when I took my first commercial flight, and I was fairly old when I took my first commercial flight because my grandfather was a licensed pilot and had a plane, and so we flew private most of the time. But I was like 6 years old the first time we got on a commercial flight, and it was because we were going from our home in Albuquerque, Santa Fe. We drove to Albuquerque, New Mexico to get on a flight to go to California to go to Disneyland when I was 6. My brother had just been born. And at that time, they spent an enormous amount of time actually feeding you on airlines. Even in coach, you got a full meal if the flight was over 90 minutes, which a flight, so at that point in time, you flew from Albuquerque because we started a hub and spoke system in the airlines. You flew from Albuquerque to Dallas, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you're looking at it from a distance perspective, right? Because Dallas is further from LAX than Albuquerque. But the way the airline system worked was through routing people to a hub in Dallas. And the old saying at that point in time was you had to go to Dallas to get to hell. Because that was it was the major hub for a lot of airlines. So you went to Dallas and then went to wherever it was you're going. So we went to Dallas. We flew from Albuquerque to Dallas. That was a short flight. We didn't get a meal because it was only something like an hour to Dallas. But Dallas to LA was, I think, something like 2.5 hours. From Dallas to LAX was 2.5 hours. So they fed you twice on that flight. They gave you a snack and then they fed you either lunch or dinner or breakfast, depending on what time your flight was. So they actually did, and this actually involved like hot food, not cold sandwiches. And they actually had silverware, even in coach. You had silverware. And people dressed up to go flying. I mean, it was a big deal to get on a commercial airline. It's not like it is today. People are wearing everything that, like absolutely showing up in their pajamas because they want to be comfortable, and their slippers because for a long time they no longer make you take your shoes off going through TSA. But you had, after 9/11, you had to take your shoes off and put them through the scanner, which just resulted in a big nightmare. So most people would wear shoes that you could easily get on and off. What's the easiest thing to get on and off? Your bunny slippers or your Crocs, which are just god awful, or flip flops, something that you can get easily on and off and go through security. So there's this big change. So Southwest actually spent a lot of time feeding you in the olden days and serving you. And if you asked most people what the purpose of a flight attendant was, they would say it's to bring me a drink and my food. Nobody would say that anymore because they don't actually do that. They might bring you a drink if if the flight is, I can tell you most flights from Oklahoma City to Dallas, they almost don't have time to do food service or even drink service. And so they're like, and if it's at all turbulent, they're just like, we're not doing beverage service today because it's a 30-minute flight from Oklahoma City to Dallas. And so they spend a lot of time, but that's not why you actually have flight attendants. You actually have flight attendants because it's a safety issue in the event of an emergency. Now, they spend very little of their time actually doing this, but what do they do at the beginning? Well, they have the safety briefing that you all have memorized if you've been on an airline more than once. Nobody's paying attention to the safety briefing. If you don't know how to use a seatbelt by this point, although I have gotten on planes and people don't actually know how to use the seatbelts because they're the old-fashioned kind of seatbelts like we had when I was a kid. The seatbelts on airplanes look like the seatbelts that we had in cars when I was a kid, in the back seats of cars. And even in the front seat of cars, like my father's pickup truck, when I grew up on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico, it had this, just a lap belt, which you inserted the flat metal piece into the buckle. That's what they tell you on the safety briefing, right? Insert the flat metal piece into the buckle. Your seatbelt should be worn low and tight against your hips. It's to keep you in place, so in case there's turbulence, you're not knocked unconscious. And you can get on YouTube now and you can see videos that people have taken of extreme turbulence. We're actually getting more and more turbulence. And there's various hypotheses as to why we're having more turbulence, one of which is controversial. Why is it controversial? Well, it involves the idea that there's global climate change and that's affecting the upper air, clear air turbulence. Other people just argue that it's because we have more airplanes in the air. When I was a kid, again, growing up, because flying was expensive, people actually traveled by bus. If you didn't want to take your car, people would actually get on a Greyhound bus and go across country. Can't imagine doing that. I think Greyhound is still in existence. I don't know that I'd want to get on a Greyhound. I don't know that I'd want to see what's on the Greyhound bus anymore. People actually did that. They got on a Greyhound bus and traveled across country. Or they got on trains. Still do in the Northeast. It's still an efficient, more efficient way. My brother, when he lived in Saratoga Springs, would take the train down to New York City to meet with his clients. So it's about safety. They have the safety briefing at the beginning of the flight. And if there is an emergency in flight, something like a fire, we're about to crash, we have a loss of cabin pressure, which might happen as a result of Boeing 737's doors flying out, right? There's a weak spot in some of the cabins that there's supposed to be a door there on some of them, but there's not, led to blowouts. And they tell you as part of that safety briefing that we never expect to experience a loss of cabin pressure, but should we experience a loss of cabin pressure, oxygen will drop from the ceiling and a mask will appear, and you're supposed to put your mask on who first? You. Anybody seen a movie called Four Christmases with Reese Witherspoon? No, it's a funny movie. She says in that movie, she's like, I want to know that you'll put the mask on me first. Vince Vaughn is her boyfriend. He's like, I'm not putting the mask on you first. They even tell you I'm not supposed to put the mask on you first. Now, why are you supposed to put the mask on you first?
So you can take care of other people.
If you lose consciousness, you're not helping anybody. And you'll lose consciousness really quickly at 35,000 feet.
Is
with
it
no
because of the
oxygen.
air? Like when you're going down fast, you just don't have air?
No, you have air. It's just that there's almost no oxygen.
It's just no
35,000
oxygen.
feet. And the oxygen masks actually don't have oxygen that flows. I mean, they don't have huge oxygen storage tanks that would keep you breathing oxygen for hours, but they can get you down to 10,000 feet.
So
Right.
are the
Actually, 14,500 feet is where you're required to provide supplemental oxygen to your passengers.
so when you're flying up and you're all the way at the top, do they have oxygen flowing into the cabin? That's why you don't have to wear your mask?
What happens is the cabin pressurization system takes oxygen out and forces it in enough, it filters enough that it pressurizes it,
Yeah.
and it keeps it at a pressure that's lower on the inside of the cabin. There's some oxygen way up there at 35,000 feet, right? And it's taking that oxygen and it is forcing it into the cabin through the pressurization system.
Mm.
And there's a whole system of valves and stuff that do that figure it out very quickly for the aircraft, and they pressurize it. And so we can get up to, 35,000 feet or higher and fly. And those are called flight levels above 18,000 feet. So below 18,000 feet, when you talk to air traffic control, they'll say something like, 453 Delta Bravo, you're cleared direct to Albuquerque via Vector 65 at, 5,500 initially, expect 12,500 10 minutes after takeoff, right? So when you get your clearance, that's what they'll say. And they keep you at 12,500 if you don't have oxygen for yourself, because that's the point at which you need supplemental oxygen. if you're at that altitude for more than 30 minutes. So it's 30 minutes or 15 minutes. I should know this, but I don't. Test question on the instrument exam, which I've taken multiple times, and I memorize it for the exam when I have to take it and then forget it. Because most of the time in Oklahoma and small planes we're flying well below that, because there's just no point in getting up that high. So it's to make sure that you know how to use the oxygen system, how to fasten your seatbelt. If there's a water landing, they'll tell you that your seat cushion can be used for flotation, or there's a flotation device under your seat. You're supposed to put it on and not inflate it until you're outside the aircraft. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to operate the main cabin doors. If you're sitting in an exit row, they're supposed to make sure that you understand how to operate that exit row, because there will not be an assigned crew member at that exit row, and you will have to remove the window, pitch it out, and then help people out of the plane before you exit the plane yourself. That's one of the advantages of sitting in an exit row, is that you have a burden on you, which is you have to be able to lift the door, which is about 50 pounds, pitch it out, and then help people get out before you get out. I can tell you I'm probably going to pitch the window out myself and exit. See ya. But that's not what I tell the flight attendant. No, this is recording. I'm going to follow the rules and help people out of the airplane, right? So the court looks at this argument that Southwest makes about only hiring females as a BFOQ, and they say that's not the purpose of flight attendant. Flight attendants are required by law, and they're about safety, and they're about doing all of these things that they really don't do. Because how often do planes crash? It's the safest form of travel. Not very often. But the court says this is not a BFOQ. And so you're going to have to hire male flight attendants. Southwest wasn't very happy with that, but they started hiring, men flight attendants. So they were the Love Airlines. So this is part of their culture. And these symbols, the heart, had meaning. And it had meaning in the minds of their employees who worked for Southwest, who were trained on how to provide love and service to people that are flying. Southwest is generally a lot more fun in the past, until they decided that they were going to cave to the pressures of the corporate world. They were a lot more fun to fly. They sort of made fun of the safety briefings because they knew that everybody had heard the safety briefings before. They had a better attitude. People who worked for Southwest loved Southwest. And they were the embodiment of living the brand, which goes to core values. These symbols and meanings that we develop, we hope, translate into core values. And Southwest's core values were that they focused on customer service, but they also focused on employee satisfaction, because the founder of Southwest believed that if you treated your employees right, they would treat your customer right. This is different than the way a lot of corporations view employees. A German sociologist named Max Weber said that the ideal form of organization is a bureaucracy. Now, when I use the word, this is one of these things, when I use the word bureaucracy, it has meaning in the mind of the American public. And that meaning is generally not good. When I say bureaucrat, what do you think of?
Federal government.
You think of the federal government. Why do you think of the federal government?
They're a bureaucracy.
They're a bureaucracy. They're a huge government. Again, we talked about this in terms of those models of federalism that I talked about, layer cake and marble cake models of federalism. And I told you that California wouldn't approve a textbook because of this discussion of cake, because it led to bad eating habits on the part of students. But what the marble cake model has done is we went from having this tiny top layer, sort of like a wedding cake. If you think of a wedding cake, if you only had a two-tiered wedding cake, the top layer of the cake was pretty small, because historically, again, what are you supposed to do with the top layer of the wedding cake? You serve the bottom layer of the wedding cake, or the bottom layers, but if we're gonna use this as our analogy for our discussion of government, we're gonna say we're having a small wedding, 25 people or less, and we're only gonna have 2 layers of the cake. Why is the top layer smaller? What's the tradition with the top layer of the cake?
For the couple.
Bride and groom eat it first.
The bride, no, they don't eat it first. When do they eat it? I'll give you a duck, even though you got that wrong. They don't eat it first. That's wrong, but because you tried. Gotta get your ducks out here, right? So that you all get your duck points over the course of the semester. So what do you do with the top layer of the cake? God, people, like this is. Nobody knows what you do with the top layer of the cake.
You frost it.
You frost it or you freeze it.
Yeah,
I think you mean freeze it, right?
yeah, exactly.
You freeze it and you eat it on your first anniversary. That's what you do with the top layer of the cake.
Is that true?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Somebody Google this.
I mean, I've heard of freezing like the cake, but I didn't realize that was the top.
You keep the cake for the whole year?
Yes. Somebody Google top layer of wedding cake. What do you do with the top layer of the wedding cake?
It's definitely true. I've heard it before too. My wife and I just didn't do it.
Is it cultural?
Typically saved and frozen to be eaten on the couple's first anniversary.
I think it's a tradition that died, obviously, none.
I've seriously never heard of that.
We rebought our wedding cake on our first anniversary to have it fresh and relive it. We didn't save it for a year.
You're supposed to freeze the top layer of the cake and eat it. Now, I'm gonna tell you that it's disgusting. I mean, like,
That's why I would just buy a new one.
after being frozen for a year, it's usually freezer burned. So it's not great, but you take the top layer of the cake. Well, in our federal government, let's say we have a wedding cake. That top layer was really, really small, right? Because like, how much cake can you eat? And you're supposed to save it for your first, and you eat the top layer at the 1-year anniversary. You don't need a whole lot of cake. I mean, that's even if, let's say the cake is, let's say the top layer is something like about that thick and about that big around. That's 2 big pieces of cake that you're eating on your wedding, on your anniversary. So just like that, the federal government was pretty small compared to the rest of the cake. After, and I told you this, after we get the Civil War, we get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution, and that allows for the expansion of the federal government. And then the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965 expand that, and the federal government takes on an even larger role. And then the Great Depression is another thing that led to the expansion of the federal government. In the 1920s, states couldn't deal with the fallout of the Depression. Places like Oklahoma faced enormous amounts of poverty and human suffering that the state couldn't deal with. And so the federal government had to step in, and the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration invented something called the Public Works Administration to try to deal with the Depression and put people back to work. And that led to an expansion of the federal workforce. So we get this larger federal bureaucracy. Before the Civil War, before the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Act, and then technological expansion, the federal government, the bureaucracy was really, really small. Most people went into federal service and they didn't stay very long. It was viewed as something you did to serve your country, and then you went back. It was the George Washington model of federal government. George Washington was the general who won the American War of Independence from Great Britain. And once that war was over, he went back to being a farmer. And then he was sort of called back into service when we got rid of the Articles of Confederation and we established the United States Constitution as our form of government. Under the Articles of Confederation, we didn't have an executive branch. We didn't have a judicial branch. We just had Continental Congress, and that didn't work very well, and so they established the federal branch. And Washington went into federal service again. He was called back by the people who wanted him to come back after the Constitutional Convention. He was the president of the Constitutional Convention, and he assumed the presidency. He did it. He established the precedence of only doing it for 2 terms, right? Only 2 terms. And then he went back home. And that's what federal service was for most of our nation's history. Then we get these problems and we get this expansion of the federal government. And so when I said bureaucrat, you said you think about the federal government. Well, a bureaucrat is an employee of the government. And we have these images in our mind of what a government employee does. And I'm going to tell you about an experience that I had when I was getting a job. I was like 16. I worked primarily for my family, so I never had to have my social security card. But the first time I wanted to get a job outside of working for my family, I guess I was older than that because I was actually out of high school when I got my first job. I had lost my social security card. Now, this is a horrific idea in this day and age, because if you lose your social security card, we have all this identity theft, right? And you can really have, so you hold on to that social security card and you guard that number very, very, but at the time we didn't have computers and it wasn't that big a deal. And so I had lost my social security card. So I had to go down to the Social Security Administration. And at that point in time, it was in Shepherd Mall. And you all don't even know where Shepherd Mall is because it's not even really a mall anymore, but it was in Shepherd Mall, which was on Northwest 23rd Street in Northwest Oklahoma City. And it was kind of like the first enclosed mall in the Oklahoma City area. So I went to Shepherd Mall to get my social security card, went to the Social Security Administration. You took a ticket from this thing. There was this red dial thing that spit out tickets, and you got a number, and then you sat and you waited for them to call your number. Now, all I wanted was a card. There are people literally in the the Social Security office, because they're there trying to apply for disability benefits. And there are people in the Social Security office that are like in an iron lung. There was some guy that had just been released from the tuberculosis ward who was coughing and hacking and dying in front of me. And there's these people that are maimed and injured, and all I want is a card. I'm like, is there an express line? Where's the line for the person who just wants the card, right? So there's all these windows at the Social Security office, and like there are all these people with these horrible problems in the Social Security office, and I'm like, because I'm kind of a hypochondriac, I'm trying not to and this was before COVID, when everybody learned that we should wear masks and stuff like that, right? So we didn't wear masks. But I'm like trying not to get sick because there's this guy that's over here, and there's like one seat, and there's some other guy in an iron lung, and there's a guy that's not got any limbs, and they're there to get Social Security disability. And I'm like, where's the express line? There's no express line, right? Because everybody's gonna be sure. So I'm sitting there with my number, and as I get my number comes up, so they have these counters up all around the room, and it would be like now helping or now serving, and these were analog, and they would just flip to the next number. Right? And it would show. So my number comes up, and as I go up to the window and I think I'm going to get my Social Security card, the guy sitting behind the window, who is got like this horrible, disgusting polyester tie and short sleeve white shirt that he spilled like coffee on, slams down the sign that says on break. And I'm like, no, I just need my card. So then I had to go wait for another window to open up, which took another 10 minutes before I could take my number up and get, and I'm thinking and you all have a Social Security card. This is not like a technologically sophisticated article of, chattel property. It's like a piece of paper. And it tells you you're not even supposed to laminate the card. If you laminate the card, it's no longer valid, right? It's like this piece of paper. All I want is a card. And it turns out I couldn't get my card the same day. So I had lost my card. I was applying for replacement. You would think that they could just give you another card. The state of Oklahoma at the time, if you went to get a driver's license, every tag agent had this machine that spit out the driver's license right then. Do any of you remember this? Like when you could actually get a driver's license at the tag agent? Don't remember, like you could go and like literally get this laminated thing spit out of a machine the same day that you applied for your driver's license in Oklahoma. When I turned 16, I went down, I filled out the forms, I took the thing that showed that I passed the driving test, and they printed out a driver's license. Nice little card. It looked exactly like the cards that we have today that they will not give you at the tag agent because they have to mail it to you now, because I don't know, this has got some special magic thing that they no longer can print these off at the tag agent, but literally like they could print these off the tag agent, they give you your driver's license right then and there. And like all I want is this card. And it turns out I couldn't even get the card. I had to wait 7 days for them to mail me the social security card. And I'm like, I'm starting my job tomorrow. Help me. I'm not in an iron lung. That's our image of the bureaucrat, the guy that like slams down the sign. Coffee break. Technically, I'm a bureaucrat. Aren't I? I'm technically a bureaucrat. I work for a governmental agency. I work for the state of Oklahoma. My pay advice comes, and when I first started here at UCO, we actually got what are called live checks now. They didn't call them live checks back then. They just said your paycheck. What's a live check? It's actually this piece of thing that you take and you have to sign the back of it and take it down to your bank and deposit it. Which happened. We used to go every month. The state of Oklahoma pays people like myself once a month. We got paid. Everybody got paid once a month. We would all go over to the bursar's counter, which you've never been to, and we would pick up our paychecks. They would hand out our paychecks based on, they had signs above the door like A through, and then blah, blah through blah, blah, blah. And then you would pick every month. We'd all go over there on payday and pick up our paychecks. And, I'm technically a bureaucrat. We have this image in our mind of the bureaucracy, but Weber likes bureaucracy. And he says the bureaucracy is the ideal form of government. What is a bureaucracy? Well, he defines a bureaucracy as 3 things. One, it's hierarchical, meaning that lower levels report to upper levels. So down here at the bottom, all of these little boxes in this organization represent areas of specialization. So first of all, the bureaucracy, according to him, which is the ideal form of government, has a hierarchy. 2, it's specialized. And 3, it's rule bound. All right. So think about like the Social Security Administration when I went, and there's the CEO at the top, or the president or whatever of the bureaucracy. It was hierarchical. The guy that I was dealing with that slammed down, he reported to a supervisor. That supervisor probably reported to managers. There were more supervisors than there were managers. There were less managers. The managers reported to that office director. Those directors reported to regional, supervisors. Those regional supervisors then reported to something else. And then you get to the top and you get to the president of the United States, who's ultimately the head of the federal bureaucracy, right? So it's hierarchical. These lower levels report to higher levels. This level doesn't report to this level. They report to this level, and this level reports to this level, right? So it's efficient. You have a specialization. The guy who takes the stuff at the window at the Social Security Administration, that's what they do. They process forms. They're not making decisions, right? They're just supposed to hit the button and let people know when their turn is. And then they take your form and they have no discretion, right? I was like pleading with her, can't you just give me I'm supposed to start tomorrow. They won't let me start without having this Social Security card because it violates federal law if they can't verify your identity. Nope, can't do that. Right? It's all, so Weber says that this is the ideal form of organization. Now, the problem with this form of organization in a business sense is that, yeah, why is it that we're rule bound? Well, it doesn't allow me to say I'm special, I'm unique, I'm skipping the line, I only need a card. Like, let me go ahead of the guy with the iron lung. He's not going anywhere fast anyway, right? Well, that's not fair. He got to the Social Security office 20 minutes before I did. He should get to go in front of me, right? So we have these core values, and one of the things that Southwest did was, rather than having sort of a really hierarchical specialized thing, they focus on the way they make you feel. The poet Maya Angelou says, people will not remember what you say. I'm paraphrasing her quote. They won't remember what you say. They'll never forget how you made them feel, right? And so Southwest, because they were the love airline, and they sort of didn't have, I mean, they do have a hierarchy, right? But you can have a flatter organization, not so many layers in between. They had these core values. In Built to Last, Successful Habits of Visionary Companies, Collins and Parias chronicle the longest lasting companies. They found out that these companies that were enduring had these core sets of values. Now, the thing about it is that you don't have to have good values necessarily. What we hope for in ethical organizations is that we develop values like Southwest. That if you treat your people right, they'll treat the customers right. And if the customers are treated right, they'll return to and for a long time, Southwest was the only airline, I believe this is still true, Southwest was the only airline to never have filed for bankruptcy protection. They were the airline that had the longest history of profitability because they had this core set of values. And those values were, by and large, what we think of as being ethically sensitive values. But Philip Morris also had a core set of values. And those values were not good, but they were successful. Why? Because they had a core set of values. What we focus on in here is trying to say, well, let's have not just a core set of values, but let's have good values. Philip Morris manufactures cigarettes. The CEO of Philip Morris, when the authors of Built to Last interviewed him, was described as ruthless and cunning. He said that he saw nothing wrong with selling products that people don't need. There's a big difference between selling products that people don't need. A lot of us have products that we don't need. And maybe products that we didn't need have become needs in the modern world. So when I got my first cell phone years and years and years ago, it was a bag phone. It weighed 12 pounds. It plugged in, it had a battery that lasted about 45 minutes, and you plugged it into your cigarette lighter in the car, and it was only a phone. And it didn't work very well in places like Guthrie. There were cell towers, and they didn't work very well in places like Guthrie, which is kind of hilly. You had to get to the top of the hill before the cell phone could pick up a tower, and it would work. And it was a luxury at that point in time. Is this a luxury today? We've gone from want to need. I don't think that this is a luxury anymore. Does anybody have a landline? Do any of you have a landline? No. Why? Why would you have a landline? It used to be people, even like 5 or 7 years ago, I'd ask people and they'd be like, yeah, I have a landline because I have an alarm on my home. And you had to have the landline to get the alarm to work. That's no longer true. Modern alarm systems have a cell number that transmits the fact that the alarm is going off to the alarm company. So I don't think that this is a luxury anymore. We've gone from want to need. But my point is that with regard to Philip Morris, which manufactures cigarettes, the CEO of Philip Morris, when they interviewed him, said, I don't see anything wrong with selling people a product that they don't need. Well, I didn't need a cell phone when I was 17 years old. I wanted a cell phone because it was kind of a prestige thing to have. None of my friends had it. It's now become not a want, it's become a need because nobody has landlines anymore. And it's a safety issue, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that happened when I was a kid growing up is when you went on a road trip, nobody had cell phones for the most part. And it was kind of dangerous to travel across country in your car. If you broke down, you hoped somebody would stop and help you change the tire. And if it was more serious than that, give you a lift into town so that you could use a pay phone to call a wrecker to go pick up your car. Don't have to do that now. You break down on the side of the road, and cars don't really break. You don't see, when I was a kid growing up and traveling back and forth between when we moved here to Oklahoma in 1986, I would go back to see my father every summer and my grandparents and stuff like that, who all lived in northern New Mexico. And we drive. And if you broke down, and you'd see people break down on the side of the road, their tires would blow out. I mean, the tires were not as good as they are today. You would see people walking down the interstate to the nearest town, you know, somebody pick them up, give them a ride. You wouldn't do that today. You see somebody on the side of the road, you're not picking them up. Unless you want to die, right? Right? I mean, like, because we have this device that has now become a need. But cigarettes are not just something that people don't need. They are actively bad for you. There's nothing, I mean, there's lots of things that we do that we don't need, but it's not actively harming you. Or maybe it is. Cigarettes are probably the worst example. Not only do you not need them, they are bad for you. We used to think that cigarettes only caused lung cancer. That's not true. They cause all kinds of other health issues besides lung cancer. In men, people who smoke have higher incidences of prostate cancer. They cause gum cancer, tooth decay, throat cancer. In women who smoke, you have increased risks of breast cancer. Smoking affects your DNA. So what we want is we want to try and instill in these core values that these businesses have, good values. Part of that is by looking at your purpose. And in a seminal work in marketing, Theodore Levitt talks about marketing myopia. If you went back to the beginning of the 20th century, some of the largest companies in America were railroad companies. And that is no longer true today. Why were they some of the largest? Well, because you needed to get goods from producer to consumer, and one of the most efficient ways of doing that historically in a large, continentally, geographically spaced out country was using railroads to get products from farm to market in an efficient way. That's no longer true. We outsource a lot of stuff and we no longer get these. So these railroad companies went broke. Why did they go broke? Because they had myopia. They failed to recognize the greater context in which they were operating. They were really good at operating railroads, but in an age in which we start producing items, not just within our own country, but externally, how do we get those items? In a classic sort of marketing kind of study, she's not a marketer, she's a journalist, but she does what is kind of a classic marketing study. A woman named Rose George writes a book called 90% of Everything. And she looks at the transportation and logistics industry, specifically shipping. And she finds out if you ask people, you know, if you go, she's from, and this is amazing to me. She starts out in Great Britain. I think she's British. She starts out in Great Britain. I'm not sure if she's British, but that's where she starts her interviews, asking people how much of the stuff that you use every day do you think comes to you by ship? Now, you would think that people in Great Britain would say a lot of stuff comes to me by ship. Why is that? Great Britain is not a continental country, it's an island country. It's this island in Europe, off the coast of France, and you would think that they would think, yeah, a lot of stuff is shipped. And she asked these people, like, how much of the stuff that we use on a daily basis do you think is shipped? And they're like, oh, not much, maybe 10%. You think that they think a lot more of this stuff was shipped, because they're an island country, right? Not much. Because we don't see it come to us on container ships. When we see delivery stuff at the store, what do we see? We see trucks. We don't even see railroads, primarily. We see trucks. So we probably think most of the stuff that comes to us by truck. Well, yeah, that's part of it. But 90% of everything that we consume comes to us by container ship at some point in time. Why is that? Because most of the stuff that we wear, at one point in time in the United States, we manufactured all of this stuff. Berkshire Hathaway, which is owned, which is chaired by a guy named Warren Buffett, was a textile manufacturer. That's how Berkshire Hathaway started. That's not what Berkshire Hathaway is now. It's an investment company. But it was a textile manufacturer. We manufactured all of this stuff in the United States. And how did we get it across the country? We manufactured it largely. So cotton was grown in the South. It was shipped to the northern industrial cities where it was manufactured in textile mills. And then it was shipped out from there across the country, largely on railroads. Where does this thing that I'm wearing, this shirt that says Guthrie Edmond Regional Airport, was this manufactured in the Northeast? No, it was manufactured in probably China or India or someplace other than the United States. And how did it get here? It got here on a container ship. How much? So Apple actually doesn't do this. Apple does, or the last time I checked, I shouldn't say that they don't because I don't know. I haven't looked in the last 5 years. But other companies do ship this device across the ocean from China. These are largely manufactured in places like China. Apple manufactures them in China. They actually ship these over the ocean because Apple has such a demand for this product that they fly this device across the ocean, but other companies don't. They send their phones by shipping container. How much do you think it costs to ship this device across the ocean in a container? Who wants to guess?
40 cents.
You're really close. Most people say $5. They think it's $5. You're actually exceedingly close. It's about 5 cents the last time I checked. To ship something like this, it's about 5 cents or less on a container ship across the world. Very efficient form of shipping. So when we talk about companies and we talk about these core values, one of the things that we want to focus on is that the railroad companies became myopic, and as a result, there are not very many of them. The biggest companies in America are no longer railroad companies. If you went back to the beginning of the 20th century, they were, because that's how you got goods. They provided a critical part. Now, it's shipping companies that are huge, although they're not even the biggest companies, right? The biggest companies are doing other things, but they lost their focus because they were so focused on being a railroad company that they lost track of the fact that they needed to expand that and look at the wider context. What is it that they were involved in? It wasn't just railroad. It was transportation, right? And the biggest companies in those industries now, in logistics, are multimodal transportation systems. In February of 2026, we'll have Valentine's Day. What is it that you are supposed to give your insignificant other on Valentine's Day? Huh?
Chocolates.
Chocolates.
Flowers.
That's flowers. That, both of those are the correct answer. Chocolates and flowers. And not just flowers, but what are you supposed to, what kind of flowers specifically
Roses.
are you, roses? So you're supposed to give your insignificant other roses on Valentine's Day. We grown a lot of roses in February in Oklahoma?
No.
Where do those roses come from? They come from South America. How do we get those roses here? It's air transport from South. It wouldn't even be on a container ship because that's too slow. But they come in on air transport. That's how we get dozens and dozens and dozens. And it's not just roses, by the way. If you give your insignificant other some types of roses, it means one thing. And if you give them another, it means another. So for example, if you give your insignificant other yellow roses on Valentine's Day, you're saying, let's just be friends. You're supposed to give red roses on Valentine's Day. And so how do we get that? Well, we fly them up from South America because in the Southern Hemisphere, it's summer in February. And it also helps that a large portion of South America is in the tropics, and roses can grow a lot longer in the tropics than they can in North America in February, right? So we're getting those from South America. They're flown in on Valentine's Day. They go to markets across America and they're shipped out from there. The thing is that you gotta not become myopic. So what we wanna do is we wanna build corporate cultures that have good values and that provide services that are not only wanted, but maybe needed, and that aren't myopic, that don't focus too narrowly on what it is that we are doing. Nobody sends greeting cards anymore. We send e-cards or messages or posts on Facebook for these holidays. And so as society evolves, it's important that you not become myopic and that you evolve with that in order to maintain a business that is economically viable. Now, the question is culture and ethics something that is top down, or is it bottom up? Is it organic? Is it something, did Philip Morris become a less than ethical company in, I think, the minds of Collins and Parias when they did this? Was that something that was systemic from the bottom up, or was it imposed from the top down? How does culture develop?
Top down.
You think it's top down. Why do you think it's top down?
Because if the people that are making the company or making the organization, it's their duty to make the culture from like the start.
Okay,
I think it depends personally,
why do you think it depends?
because sometimes it's like top up, like I would say,
You mean top down?
yeah, top down, like them or like Boeing, like the heads not following the rules and stuff like that. But sometimes it could be stuff like Amazon, they could have all the ethics in the world, but it's something so big, people on the bottom like running their own little world, it could totally be from the bottom. Like it depends on the organization.
I think that's right. I think it does depend on the organization. I'll give you an example. I think if you have a new organization, I think it's easier to establish the culture from the top down if you have a brand new organization. If you don't have a new organization, I think it's more difficult. So for example, before we had President Lamb, we had another president here, President Newhold Rao Kumar. Do any of you remember, were any of you here when she was president? She had a very different idea of where she wanted the university to be, and she tried to impose that vision on the university, and it was met with less than wonderful success. And why is that? Well, because in a well-established organization like UCO, where we have a history of shared governance, it's harder to establish a culture from the top down. Why? Well, particularly at an institution like UCO, faculty members, so I am one of the ones that delivers the product or service that we provide. The thing that institutions of higher education provide, and the reason that you're here is because you want this piece of paper that says when you graduate, you're educated and you have the skill set and you can go out and you can get a job, right? And I'm the one that provides that. Now, in most organizations, if, for example, we're talking about iPhones, if I am like manufacturing this iPhone, if I'm part of the manufacturing process and I'm not doing exactly what I should be doing the way you want me to do it, you can fire me. Can the president of UCO fire me?
Yes.
No,
No.
no. I have tenure.
Boom.
The only people who can fire me are the Board of Regents of Oklahoma colleges. That makes it really hard to impose a top-down culture. Not saying it can't be done. There are organizations that are trying to change things in higher education. At Emporia State in Kansas, they did away with tenure.
Kansas University or
Emporia State
in Kansas.
Yeah. It's really like the culture is very ingrained in higher education. And it's largely bottom up. Because organizations of higher education have largely relied upon the idea of shared governance, which means that the faculty have this expertise in their areas of specialization, and you should listen to them. It's important. We're not bolting tires on Buicks here. How do you measure what I do? How do we measure whether or not you are getting a good education? That's really hard to do, isn't it? Really hard to do. How do we do it? How do we determine that you're successful? I guess you could say, do my students get jobs? I'm pretty lucky in that I teach in a program where our students get jobs. Our sales program students get jobs and they make good money. It's harder if you're talking about something else. When I was teaching law, 23 of my students went on to law school and graduated and passed the bar. Maybe I was part of the problem. What do you call 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean? A good start. Really, really hard to measure that. It's not as easy. So it really depends on what the organization, whether it's a new organization or an old organization. If it's a new organization, it's much easier to establish culture from the top down. If it's a small organization, a family business, it's much easier to establish the culture from the top down. If it's an old organization and a big organization, it's harder to do that. It's a combination of both. I'm out of time. We'll finish this next time and we'll move on. If you guys have any questions, let me know.
It's fall break now, isn't it? After today?
After today, yeah, that's correct, isn't
And then classes start back up on Monday?
it? Monday. Cool. I think that, let me look, I think I have it.
I think that's right, but
Let me
I never
stop
know.
the stream, just one second.
Thursday, Friday?
Yeah, that's what I thought.